Welcome to your favorite panel of the day. Actually, they've all been really great. So I begin this conversation with a statistic that sort of struck me as I was prepping for this. In 2014, people of color purchased 46% of American movie tickets. That's nearly half. Franklin, let me start with you. Does Hollywood understand that?
I mean, the short answer is no.
Okay, why is it a mystery to Hollywood?
Because 46% of the people working at the decision-making levels in Hollywood aren't people of color. And the people who do make the decisions about what gets greenlit and how they're cast and who's writing them and who's directing them, not only are they not people of color, but they don't have a lot of day-to-day social contact with people of color. And so they're not aware of the reality of the world that their consumer audience represents. And I think as a consequence, there are numerous biases about what should be rational economic decisions that take that statistic into account, but don't.
Okay, so Ana-Christina, you've done a lot of studying of this. I mean, at what point does the business reality supersede, I know Franklin said this, the sort of historical biases?
Right. Well, what we say is you have to start from the top. And so what Franklin was saying is that the people that are greenlighting and working behind the scenes, they're mostly white males. And so the only way that you're going to see some change is to have minorities be in positions of power to make those decisions from the top. And then that will then infuse throughout the industry. And you're going to keep then hiring more diverse people that are writers, showrunners, actors, directors, and so forth.
Well, I want to sort of push against this idea of where the hurdle lies. Len, you're at HBO. Give us a peek behind the curtain as far as the decisions that are made and to the degree to which diversity or different perspectives are prioritized in the decision-making process.
Well, I think what Franklin says is true, but also think that as the demographics change, people are aware that this is no longer some kind of good deed. You know, it's been kind of now explained in a real business sense, dollar sense, and that's something that business people understand. And it's a conversation that I think is happening. I know it's a conversation that's happening every day, and especially in the last couple of years, it's been happening quite intensely. It's a holistic problem for the industry. It's not just the executive suite, although the executive suite at the different companies needs to improve, but it's also systemic in the sense that you have to look at the agencies and everywhere where there's a sense of power, because you know people feed each other in terms of how people get opportunities. And you know, the statistics are really helpful and really do give a good indicator, but also trying to make the conversation more holistic and elevate it to the point where it's not just looking at statistics, but kind of looking at the individuals who are doing what they do, the individual projects, and the idea that if the conversation is elevated in the culture, and you want to have different points of view, and you need to have different stories, and there's an audience that is completely underserved out there, and that's going to be good business as well as good art. That's something that indicates that I think that there's a positive side and a hopeful side to all this.
It feels like Hollywood is one of those industries where gatekeeping exists at every level, right? You're laughing. I want to talk about the agency thing because I feel like that's an aspect of this that a lot of folks don't. We know what a studio head is, like this monopoly character in the top hat, like I'm making this movie. Speaking in just that voice, but agents are really critical in the sort of ecosystem. As an actor, tell us about that process of getting your first agent and like sort of how roles come to you.
Look, I mean, you know, being a performer in this business is insane because nobody wants to hire you until you've actually done this job, and nobody wants to, you know, you can't get that experience until you've actually gotten the job. So it's the catch-22 always. So the person that you've got to be your advocate to say, trust me, get him in the room, it'll work out, is the agent. And so it all comes down to whether or not that agent gets what you've got.
Right.
If they get it. I do a workshop for actors, and in one of them I have an actress who is, she's Polish, and she's like literally huge in Poland. You know, she's there right now, like, you know, hosting a show. And her American, part of her representatives here has told her she should change her name. It's too
Polish?
Too Polish. Too Polish. You know what I mean? Which is, you know, and I've gotten the compliment where they said, you know, this is what's good about Jason. He's not too black, not too white.
Has that been said to you?
You would believe the things that I've gotten. One of my earliest gigs, I remember walking in and one of the writers pulled me aside, and this is forever ago. And they said, I just want you to know that we're here for you and we got your back and everything like that. I said, that's great. I appreciate that. And they were like, no, because we've got the Ebonics dictionary and we've got the.
No.
Am I sitting here with my right hand up, ladies and gentlemen? It happens. And here's the thing. And this again, my big thing these days is do you want to be right or do you want to solve the problem?
Right.
Right is about being righteous and everything like that. And I could have gone off on her because what the hell, right? You know, serious WTF moment. But solving the problem is she means well at the end of the day. So I said, that's fantastic. Here's the thing. You write what you want the character to say, and when I say it, it'll be black.
By virtue of the fact that you're black.
And we're done. And so, so
Are you flabbergasted at that level? Like, I mean, I think that
I'm
that's...
a black man from Virginia. I'm from the South.
So right. So nothing surprises you.
I'm not shocked by any of it. But what it comes down to, though, is she's coming from where she's coming from. Everybody has unconscious bias, which is the nice term nowadays for prejudice. But no, but here's the thing. But prejudice, the reason why we don't use that word anymore is because now it has this pejorative term to it that makes it sound, prejudice is a half step from racist.
Yeah.
And racist is the way of calling non-black people's niggers. You know what I mean? If you call somebody a racist, that's where they flustered and how do you fight a negative and I don't know where to go with that. And the reality is everybody has unconscious bias. And regardless of what your skin color is or where you're coming from, you know your story and that's all you know until you bump up against somebody who has a different story. And you go, oh, let's exchange that. Let's exchange this. And the thing about this SAG-AFTRA, we explicitly try and get as many creative opportunities for actors as we can and when they work, we try and make sure they get the best wages and working conditions they can. That's our explicit purpose. The implicit understanding is that our members are the faces that appear in the mirror that we call television and film.
It's a reflection of American society.
It's the reflection of American society. And if you're not there, you don't exist.
So as we talk about the levels at which we have a better reflection of our American, who we are as a country, it's not just the actors, it's also the stories, right, Franklin? I mean, and when you look at the numbers, I think I have some stats on the number of people of color who are writing is like 9%. The number of women who are writing in Hollywood, it's like 12%. I may have those backwards.
Yeah.
Ana-Christina, you will know better than I do. Yeah. But at the ground level, at the entry point, what's needed are more scripts written by people of color, by women, by people whose experiences are different. I know that this is, we've been talking about the blacklist and for other purposes, Atlantic Magazine purposes, but talk to me a bit about the sort of landscape as it concerns the stories that are being told in Hollywood.
Well, look, I think that there is, I think because of the historical nature of that bias, like the fact that overwhelmingly throughout the history of Hollywood, writers, directors, producers, everybody has been white men. There is some self-selection out of the pool for people who might be very talented as writers and directors. So we and the Nickel Fellowship, which is the Academy Screenwriting Competition, for example, usually it's a 2/3, 1/3 male to female ratio in submissions alone. So women aren't even sort of putting themselves forward. Now some of that is sort of the cultural bias from men finishing their screenplay and thinking it's the greatest thing ever, whereas women will be like—
you call that cultural bias?
Look, it could be nature, it could be nurture, I don't know, I suspect it's probably a little bit of both. But I think also then there is bias about, when a script comes across somebody's desk, the assumption is, this is an all-Latino cast, it's an all-black cast, so we're limited to a domestic audience, we can't sell this abroad, for which I've never seen any actual quantitative analysis. And increasingly, the foreign box office is what's driving decisions that are made at the major studios about what gets made. So you actually see smaller budgets for female-driven projects. You see smaller budgets for projects by and about people of color. There's the assumptions when you say the word film director, what image comes to mind? It's, you know, a hipster white guy with like funky glasses who lives in Williamsburg or the east side of LA. It's not Ava DuVernay, though maybe it should be, and it certainly should have been after she won the directing award at Sundance and was still trying to get studio meetings. And look what she's done in just the last 18 months. Like, it's astounding. And so I think that there's a bias in, there are folks who are less likely to try to work in Hollywood because they assume that it's not for them, that it's not the place to take their talents to. And once they do take their talents to, they have a harder time breaking through the various barriers because the assumptions that are made about what they're capable of and the sort of economic potential of their material, they're undervalued. And again, I think that's a bias, it's a consequence of prejudice and racism. But it's one that violates every bit of quantitative evidence we have about, you know, what can be successful. I mean, I've said for a very long time, the only significant affirmative action that exists in Hollywood right now is in favor of white men. Because if it was purely a meritocracy, you'd see a lot more diversity than exists right now.
Well, I'm curious, Glenn, at HBO, I mean, how many scripts or how many pitches come across your desk for an all Latino cast? Just give us a sense of the content that's out there that is either getting turned down or accepted.
Well, I mean, I can't only speak for films,
Yeah.
right? Because that's what I do, and honestly, we generate and we develop a lot of our own material. So I'm not seeing a lot of scripts that come across my desk with all anything, but we generate material that sometimes does have that type of a situation. There's no real percentage to that. We try to find the right filmmakers. We try to find stories that are interesting, and really it's the story that drives everything.
Do you feel like television, premium cable, and maybe streaming services are better on the issue of diversity, quote unquote, than broadcast?
Well, I think there's less restrictions of the type that Franklin's talking about in terms of trying to have to depend on foreign sales and all those kind of old school rules that they have about whether some actor or some actress makes money or some subject matter is right or some subject matter is wrong. That stuff is still in play. In premium cable, I think people are really just looking to do great stuff, you know? And, you know, I don't know that, I mean, how do you separate, you know, the amount of diverse people who were part of the O.J. Simpson series and the documentary from the idea that, well, the themes kind of like hit that stuff head on, and the story is just great. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think it's the story itself that's really driving what happens there and the choices that are happening. But generally speaking, there's not a lot of rules that are dictating the type of stories that people do in cable. But I want to get back to, you know, because I do think unconscious bias is a big thing, and because, you know, look, when we think about it, it's like if the audience is there, if the money's to be made, and if people still aren't telling those stories, what's the issue? What are people missing? And so I would urge everybody to kind of look into that and see what that's about. And you know, it's essentially that people like to do things with other people who they think are members of their own tribe. You know, and that's what it is. And so if you got an industry where the tribe is mostly white or mostly male, you know, big surprise. People are going to feel more comfortable mostly white, and that's the cultural barrier that I think we have to pay attention to. People are talking about it more, and we have to break that.
Well, and I think in Hollywood it's much easier to say no than it is to say yes, and the safe decision is the safe decision is a safe decision.
In Hollywood, you spend most of your time saying no. If you could say yes all the time, the job would be easy.
Well, but
so,
even
you know,
when you know, I mean, even when you know something's a good script, Blacklist is a great example. Even when you know something's a great script, can you hear me? People will say no to it because it just seems too out there. And that, I think, probably reinforces a lot of the patterns that we're seeing here. Ana-Christina, in terms of the money that is being left on the table here,
Yeah.
give us a sense of those economics.
Well, in our study, we look at entire TV season, so all the shows on broadcast, on cable, on digital, streaming, and we look at in front of and behind the camera who's working on those shows, and then we also look at the top 200 films in terms of their box office success globally. So we don't even just focus on domestic, we look at the global box office. And from what we've seen is that the takeaway is that diversity sells. So that's a finding that is found in the past 3 reports. So there's no way around it. There's no way to excuse it or to explain it away. It's basically that diversity sells in terms of box office success and your return on investment for films, and in terms of your TV ratings. And so obviously for TV ratings, like that's how you sell your advertisements and make money for the network. So it's clear then that if networks and studios are not capitalizing on that, then they're leaving money on the table. And the best example is the Fast and the Furious franchise in terms of films, because the fact that it's now it's going to be number 8 coming up. I mean, who would expect something to have 7 films and for the 7th film to be as successful as it was? And when you look at that cast, it's actually a majority minority cast. Then you can see why it would be successful globally, because everyone in the world has somebody that they can relate to on that screen. And it was directed by a minority as well. And so it's just something that shows that, yes, Hollywood loves formulas, and it was an action movie, and people can say, oh, of course, it just made money because it was an action movie, but it made an astronomical amount of money because of the fact that it was diverse and that people could relate to it. So you can make a lot of money following a formula, but you can make even more money if you put in diversity into the picture.
Jason, how explicit in a business context is the conversation about race in Hollywood?
Explicit in a business conversation amongst actors, or
amongst, let's say, mixed company, white agents, white studio head, black actor? How much can race actually be front and center on the table?
I mean, if it's with your people on your team, it'll be a very frank conversation. You know what I mean? There was a time where, if I'm going in the open to all ethnicities is the line that casting directors will put in the thing, and there are some casting directors that when they say open to all ethnicities, you will see all ethnicities in the room. And then there are folks where it says open to all ethnicities, and I'll walk in and I'm the one guy, one of these kids.
Well, wait, what does that mean? You're the one what guy? You were the one black guy?
I'm the one non-white guy in the room.
But then,
to go in to play the lawyer. Right, and that's changed.
But what's that about?
I will say that's changed.
Why were you the one guy that was like, oh, open to all the ethnicities, play the lawyer? Like, is it a
dog
really, whistle?
Because they didn't really mean open to all ethnicities. What they meant was.
Well, why didn't you get that memo? What did you read?
I have to say that because we have to say that we're open to all ethnicities, but the truth is that I'm going to see the usual suspects and the people that I think are really going to book the job and that sort of thing. And here's the thing. This is. And everybody's touched on it, Franklin did a little bit. Everybody's making assumptions about what the other people that they answer to are going to do. The audience isn't, well, I would hire you, says the casting director, but the director is really not going to, the director's going to have a hassle. The producers are going to, and every director's saying the same thing, producers are saying the same thing. They're all pointing to the audience isn't really going to respond. I mean, when you talk about the international piece, never seen, there's so much evidence to the contrary, and so often I've heard this phrase that, black people don't play in China. Black people can't open movies in China. And I'm like, unless you're Will Smith.
Or Denzel.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Denzel.
Or Jamie Foxx.
Yeah.
And what it really came down to was you never send movies with black people to China. And when Will Smith did Independence Day, they said we're going to take the movie to China. He said, when are we going to China? And they said, well, the movie's going, but you're not. And he said, I'm going to China, and he made them take him to China. He meets the guy, and it really is just one guy who's in charge of deciding all the films that comes to China, pats him up, they have a good time, loves Will Smith. Next thing you know, Will Smith can do anything he wants in China. Yeah. Why? Because the exposure happened. That's all it comes down to.
That seems like a comedically dangerous herd mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
I mean,
doesn't it?
That's what happens.
I mean, but that's the flabbergasting.
But
when you're
here's the thing.
talking about the Chinese market and that so many profits would be going.
it's not just the Chinese market. There is a default assumption that you cannot sell people of color outside of the United States.
Right.
When Straight Outta Compton was greenlit, the assumption about how much money it would make non-domestically was $0. That was what went into the model to determine how much money it would make. Now, you know, for some people, they looked at Straight Outta Compton and said, well, it's the story of these, like, you know, get black gangster rappers from Compton. That's not going to sell in France. It's not going to sell in Germany. It's not going to sell in Japan. But if you're looking at it realistically, it's also the story of arguably the most influential music group in the most influential art form of the last 40 years worldwide, period, full stop. And looked at it that way, it makes sense that it would do well in Europe. It makes sense that it would do well abroad. Now look, did it do as well as Walk the Line? I don't believe that it did. But again, was it marketed as aggressively as Walk the Line was? I doubt it. So I think we need to be realistic about the assumptions that we make and make sure the assumptions that we make are based on concrete quantitative evidence. And when they are, then we can address those issues. But I've yet to see a quantitative argument made on behalf of the claim that is accepted as law. It's hard to sell people of color abroad.
On that note, we have a couple minutes for questions, so we have one right here. If you want to run the mic around, thanks.
Hi, Alexa Brown at Pepperdine Law. So I'm hearing a lot of conversation on numbers and selling abroad, and I'm curious what the conversation is on the emotional impact and what Hollywood, if they're talking about, you know, our youth and people really looking for images of, you know, I want to see, who do I look for beautiful women or attractive men, and it's, you know, very white right now. So what's the conversation like on that?
Len,
I'm sorry.
Well,
is there a morale? Does
yeah.
HBO care about morality?
Yeah, well, care about what?
I'm kidding.
No, of
how
course
much-
not. So, no, look, that kind of, the way I interpret your question is that do we need to be looking for different stories that reflect a diverse audience, new voices, original voices that are diverse voices? Of course. It's dumb if you don't. And there's a lot of emphasis on that right now.
The thing I would say is that technology, now there's a million ways to amuse yourself, has brought things down. Of course, that's a conversation we should be having. That's the conversation we're always having. But at the end of the day, every time there was a film starring an all-Latino cast or an all-Asian cast and it didn't do well, the blame automatically goes onto the ethnicity or, you know, all-female cast. The reality is maybe this wasn't the best script. When it's a great script, you know, you got to look at ways to find somebody who thought Creed was a black film. It's Rocky. It's the best Rocky sequel there's ever been, and the lead happens to be black. So those conversations are happening, but the reason why the money conversation is leading is because at the end of the day, Hollywood talks green, and the green. You know, I buy tickets to movies opening weekend that I don't go to, just to vote with my dollar.
That's a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, one more question right here.
Colette Brooks. The diversification of media and how people consume media, is that driving the kinds of productions, whether it's their Netflix limited series or HBO limited series, rather than broad-based films?
I suspect that the diversification of media consumption exerts an exorbitant amount of financial pressure on the film studios. So, you know, look, domestic box office is largely flat, international is growing, which makes that like the sort of primary vertex or primary sort of leverage point in terms of which decisions are made. DVD obviously has collapsed and people are still figuring out the monetization of streaming sort of in an optimal fashion. So, you know, inherently the film studios are a lot more conservative about the decisions they make because they feel they have a lot more stake at which, and they need to make absolutely sure those movies turn a profit. The explosion of all of these other outlets, though, is really exciting because it means that as a person of any background, if you can make something great, and you know you can shoot it on your iPhone and then just put it on the internet, you can get it to the entire world with the keystroke. And so I think what's really exciting, I think, about the potential of the diversification of media consumption and distribution and production is that it means that we don't have to rely on the film studios to distribute our stuff and make money on it. And I think that has the potential to exert a lot of pressure on these sort of legacy structures that exist because, hey, if you guys don't change, we're just not going to show up to your stuff and we're going to go where the content that reflects us is. I don't think we're seeing a broad-based change yet, but I think the potential certainly exists. And every day that goes by, if Hollywood doesn't change, they, render themselves more likely to be irrelevant.
I also think that having so many other options has brought the numbers down. As you've seen the ratings in TV drop,
Yeah.
it allows the information that Ana-Christina and them come up with to be much more visible and much more relevant. When you need 15, 20 million people in order, for your show to be a hit, nobody cares about this small audience of 1 or 2 million people. But when you suddenly, when 2 million, viewers gets you, a 3-year run, having, stacking audiences, I need some of my Black folks, I need my Asians, I need my Latinos, makes a huge difference.
Right.
And just in more a general sense, when great creativity, right, intersects with diversity, that's a winning formula, right? So like the show we're doing with Issa Rae, total diverse production, behind the scenes, in front of the scenes. That starts with great talent. I don't think the conversation is got to find somebody diverse, but is that a good thing? Of course that's a good thing. And then you have great talent that comes along with it. So
I'm just going to lead into the next conversation, great creativity and diversity. The director you're about to see come up, I had the good fortune of seeing his movie several days ago at Toronto. Barry Jenkins' film Moonlight, you're going to hear him talk. Go see his movie. Like, please vote with your dollars. You will not be disappointed, but I think it is a reflection of when a perspective that you've never seen put to film before is paired with formal brilliance, you get a wholly new cinematic experience. And I hope that it gets the audience sort of attention it deserves, because it is truly an extraordinary film.
And with that, thank you for the segue, Franklin. Hang in your seats. Thank you guys for your time and thoughts. Stay with us.